we do find ourselves here toward the end. We are fast approaching the end of what we've been studying in our look through the Synoptic Gospels. We've been studying Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the similar Gospels, as they are presented here in the New Testament. We've walked through roughly 1/3 of the story at this point. Over the last 3 years, we've walked through about 1/3 of the story. And what we've been looking at lately have been the miracles of Christ. So we've talked about a lot of his pre-ministry stuff. We've talked about the Sermon on the Mount. We've talked about a lot of the conflict he was experiencing with the people and with the religious leaders at the time. And over the last little while, what we've been looking at are Jesus' miracles. And in Mark and in Luke, all of these miracles that we've been studying are arranged together and in the same exact order. And then if you jump over to Matthew and you read the account of these miracle stories, they are also grouped together in like the same section, though they are in a little bit different order. But so far, all of the things that we've been looking at when we look at Jesus' miracles are shared, stories that are shared in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So I'm going to reach out to the class now. Who can remind me of the miracles so far that we have already studied kind of in this section? Not over our entire study, because we've seen a lot, but in this last little section of Scripture that we've been studying, who can tell me about some of the miracles we've already looked at? Okay, so he healed the woman with the issue of blood. And this, we looked at that just last week. This is most recently what we looked at. And we're going to pick up today kind of where we left off in the middle of that story and see how it concludes. But yes, Jesus healed a woman who had an issue of blood. And what is one of the things that Jesus showed when he healed that woman who had the issue of blood? What did he show his power over when he did that? Illness. So all of these miracles, Jesus is demonstrating his power over some aspect of reality. And in this case, he was showing his power over illness, over sickness. What's another miracle that we've seen in this section? Okay, so there was a man who was possessed by a legion of demons. Jesus cast them out into the pigs. The pigs ran off the cliff, you remember. It says the people saw the man and they were afraid because he was sitting and clothed and in his right mind. And then they were afraid and they asked Jesus to leave. In that story, what is Jesus demonstrating or showing his power over in that story, in that miracle? What was that?
Supernatural.
The supernatural realm, very well. So he's showed his authority over sickness. He's showed his authority in the supernatural realm, the way he can command demons. What's another miracle that we've seen so far in this section? There's one. Well, we haven't gotten that far yet. We haven't actually covered that one yet.
Weren't they in a boat and there was a storm and he calmed the storm?
Okay, so yeah, that was the first one. We hit them all in reverse order. We walked backwards through them. So the first one was when they got in the boat. Jesus sent them to the other side, to remember. And he fell asleep on the boat, and there was a great storm. And then Jesus stood up, and he rebuked the winds and the waves, and they stood perfectly still. And in that story, what is Jesus demonstrating or showing his power over in that story? Over nature, over the natural world. So he shows his power over the natural world and the winds and the waves when he calms them. He shows his power over the supernatural world when he commands all the demons to leave the man. He shows then his power over sickness when he heals the woman with the issue of blood. And then today we're going to finish up this little section here by looking at Jesus and his demonstration of power over death itself as we get into the rest of this miracle. So while we're picking up here in Mark chapter 5, I would like to kind of just pick up where we left off. And what I would like to do is to read the story so it's fresh in our mind, do kind of a quick little overview, and then get into the details of the second half. So we already walked through the details of the first half of the story. Let's walk through the details of the second half of the story tonight. But we're going to begin actually by reading the entire passage. And I would like to start in Mark chapter 5. We're going to start in verse 21. And will somebody please read verses... I'm on the wrong chapter. No wonder that didn't work right. I'm looking in the wrong book. Mark chapter 5, And we're going to start in verse 21. And let me see where we need to read to. Mark chapter 5. Will somebody please read verses 21 through 23?
Now when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him and camped by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell to his feet and begged him again, saying, and begged him earnestly, saying, My little daughter lies on the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live.
And I'll pick up and I'll read a little section here. It says, And Jesus went with him, and many people followed him, and thronged him. And a certain woman which had an issue of blood for 12 years, and she suffered many things from many physicians, and she spent all that she had, but nothing ever got better. Rather, it only grew worse. When she heard of Jesus, she came in the press from behind, and she touched his garment. For she said, If I may touch but only his clothes, I shall be made whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body immediately that she was healed of the plague. Will somebody please read verses 30 through 34?
At the same time, Jesus, aware that power had gone out from him, turned around in the crowd and asked, Who touched my clothes? His disciples responded, You see people pressing in on you, and still you ask, Who touched me? But he kept looking around to see who had done it. The woman, frightened and trembling, because she knew what had happened to her, came and fell down in front of him and told him the whole truth. Daughter, he said to her, Your trust has healed you. Go in peace and be healed of your disease.
All right, let's pause right here for a moment, because this is where we left off last week. We walked through this much of the story, both in summary and in detail last week. So does anybody want to maybe recap some of the things we talked about last week, share any insights from anything that we've seen up to this point? Basically, does anybody have any comment, questions, or anything about the story about Jesus healing the woman with the issue of blood before we move forward?
Well, I just remember that there were so many people around him, thronging to him, you know, begging, I'm sure begging for this, that, and the other. And yet, her faith, it was just so evident to him. And so...
Well, that's a really good point. Like she said, so he's in this crowd. He's being thronged. Lots of people are touching him. I think it's important for us to see this. I'm glad you brought that out. It wasn't the simple fact that this lady touched Jesus that resulted in her healing. Lots of people were touching Jesus, and I don't know if they were being healed or not. He doesn't say they were. So, as far as we know, out of all of the people that were touching Jesus, this lady alone is the only one who actually received any kind of healing in this event, in this story. And what we see from that is that it wasn't simply the fact that she touched Jesus, the act of reaching out and making contact with his clothes. That is not where the power is. That's not what actually caused the healing. What was it that actually caused the healing? What was the difference between this woman and everybody else?
Her faith.
It was her faith.
You know, but what's strange is this wasn't a conscious effort on Jesus' part to heal.
Right.
When he said, I felt the power leave me.
Right. It's like her faith drew his power out, in a sense.
So what does that mean for us? If we can we do the same?
Yeah. If we can reach out in faith and lay hold of Christ, could we draw out some sort of power, some sort of virtue from Christ? If we are courageous and fearless like this unclean woman and reach out in faith to touch Christ, might something significant happen in our lives in the same way? Might we draw out his power? Because as our brother said, it's not like Jesus was like looking for someone to heal and said, you're the one, and then he did it, you know what I'm saying? It was literally drawn out of him. Yeah, so that's very interesting. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Go ahead.
Well, you read verse 33 that said, that she came and fell down before him and told him all the truth. Just all the truth. You know, Jesus was going to Jairus' house. And when she came and told all the truth, she probably told him every doctor and everything that happened to her all those years. And that just prolonged the agony of Jairus.
Yeah, that's a very good detail.
So that's just a prelude to what we're doing.
Yeah, and that's very important to keep in mind. I'll call your attention again to this contrast that we highlighted last week, the contrast between Jairus, who is in essence the most important person in the community. He's the ruler of the synagogue. I described it last week as, imagine if we had a town, and in that town there was one church, and one school, and one bank, and one courthouse, and there was one guy who ran the entire system. That's basically what the ruler of the synagogue was. He was the man who was in charge of this institution that was like the main thing in the city. It was all of these different things I described all in one. The synagogue, it was like the focus of every town. So the guy who was in charge of that, he was a very important fella. And then you contrast him with this unclean woman who had the issue of blood. Someone who would have lived outside of the town. She was a social reject. No one wanted to be around her because she was unclean. Everything she touched was unclean. Everybody she touched became unclean. Bad situation. Yet, nevertheless, Christ, in the middle of doing something for this very important man, had the time to stop and minister to this nobody, this outcast, this reject. And as you point out, it doesn't seem like he was like rushing through the thing, but rather he stood there and he ministered to her. So that's important to remember. Well, let's go ahead and pick up now and read the rest of the story and kind of walk through in detail the things that come after. So this is the interruption, but we pick back up now in verse 35. So will somebody please read verses 35 through 38?
While he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult and those who wept and wailed loud.
Okay, so in this little passage here, there's several things that we want to look at and to point out. The first thing I want to point out is that somebody approaches them at this time. So he's talking to this woman, he's ministering to this woman, and who comes up? Well, he's there, and he's with Jesus. Okay, so yeah, people from his house. Some of the, I think Luke or Matthew, one of them says attendants from his house. Maybe they were his friends, maybe they were his servants, maybe it was people who worked under him at the synagogue, but somebody came from Jairus' house, and what was their message to him?
Your daughter died.
Your daughter died. But there's something interesting even before we get to that part. They said, "Do not trouble the teacher any longer." And that might seem like kind of a throwaway sentence to us, but something that I heard and that it pricked my ear when I heard this was that notice how these people thought about Jesus.
They really revered him.
Well, yeah, they revered him, but notice what they didn't think of him as. Maybe I should say it this way. They did not think of Jesus as the miracle worker. They did not think of Jesus as the magic man. They didn't say, "Hey, you can leave the miracle worker alone. The daughter's dead, it's too late." They didn't say, "Hey, you can leave the witch doctor alone. It's too late. There's no chance for her." No, they said, "Why are you bothering the teacher?" Jesus was, first and foremost, a teacher. Go ahead.
I'm confused.
Okay, what are we confused
I
about?
know I wasn't here last week, or last Wednesday, I don't think, so are we talking about the woman with the blood? Or is this another daughter?
Okay, this is a different person. So let's back up and get a general summary. So this is how the story goes, right? We read the first half of it. He gets there. Jairus comes to Jesus and says, hey, my daughter's dying. Come with me. Jesus says, okay. While they're on their way to get to Jairus' house, this other woman comes and interrupts the party about the whole touching thing. And then he stands there and he hears her whole life story and all of this stuff. And while all of this is going on, these other people come from Jairus' house, and now they're like, hey, your daughter's dead. Don't worry about it. Don't trouble the teacher anymore because she's dead. While y'all were down here doing your thing, she died. Sorry. So it's
They really thought that Jesus couldn't do anything because they had hired the flute players and professional wailers.
Right.
Whenever you died, it was a big spectacle.
Yes, this is true. And we've talked about that before. Does anybody remember when we saw this before? And we talked about the professional weepers and wailers and how they would like have a parade that goes through town.
Centurion's servant?
I don't think it was the centurion. It was at Nain. It was some resurrection in Nain that we read about
Lazarus?
in our study. It wasn't Lazarus. That hasn't happened yet.
I'm
Yeah.
talking about, but it didn't happen, Lazarus did that.
Yes, Lazarus did rise from the dead. I don't know if they had the mourners there or not. He had been dead for 4 days. I don't remember that part of the story. It was the little boy. Jesus raised a boy in Nain. And there was a whole procession heading outside of the town. And we kind of talked about it back then. One of the things that they would do in this world, part of their culture, is that when somebody would die, they would literally hire people to mourn. They would play flutes, they would weep, they would wail. It was like this big spectacle. In fact, like you had to. Even the poorest of people were basically required to have at least 2 flute players and 1 professional mourner in case somebody died. You had to pay these people to come. It was a big deal, and the whole process lasted for several weeks. Go ahead. Oh, I thought you were raising your hand. But yeah, so we see this. We'll come back to that in just a moment because we're kind of progressing toward this here. But notice they said, "Do not trouble the teacher." So I just want to really emphasize this. These people viewed Jesus first and foremost as a teacher. It was his teaching that endured the people to him, even more than his miracles. They didn't think of him as a miracle worker. Rather, they thought of him as a teacher. And what is Jesus' response to this news?
Just keep believing.
Yeah, basically don't stop believing, right?
Don't stop believing.
Don't stop believing. Go ahead.
Well, that's the difference between the woman with the issue of blood
Okay.
and the people that was roaming around. Because she didn't say, well, gosh, if I could just listen to him one more time. No, she said, if I can just touch his clothes, I will be made well. So, and the difference is there. These other people say, nah, don't bother him, go away. And leave him alone. Where she was just bent.
Yeah.
Just to touch his clothes. She didn't say, oh, he's a teacher.
Right.
She knew he would heal her.
Yeah.
Or just the mere touch would heal her.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, yes, this is Jesus' response. He tells them, listen, don't be afraid, only believe. And then if you look at in Mark, or if you look at it in Luke and you look at it in Matthew, and not only does he say, fear not, only believe, but he also says, basically, if you believe, she shall be made whole. And again, like we pointed out last week, when it says that the woman with the issue of blood was made whole, it's really the same word that we translate in other places as she was saved. So he's in essence saying that she was saved. She experienced salvation in her faith. And it says the same thing here if you read it in Luke, if you read it in Matthew. When it says, only believe and she shall be made whole, it's that same word. It means saved. She shall be saved. She shall experience salvation. Only believe. Do not fear. Only believe. This was his response to them. And then from there, who does he allow to come with him? This is a good question.
His inner circle.
His inner circle. And who is the inner circle?
Peter, James, and John.
Peter, James, and John. And fun fact, this is the first instance in the New Testament that we see Peter, James, and John being brought a little bit deeper than the rest. It will not be the last time. There are several instances where Peter, James, and John got to experience things that the other disciples did not. But this is the first time that Peter, James, and John are chosen specifically, set apart from the apostles to come with Jesus on this thing that he is doing. This will become something of a habit in their time with Jesus, but we do need to recognize that this is the first time that Jesus has set them apart in this way. They are, in fact, the inner circle. These are the people that are closest to Jesus. Go ahead.
And it's funny because the way I learned the disciples at Vacation Bible School, there's Peter and Andrew, James and John, the many most depended on. And Philip and Bartholomew and many kept on. But I just always remembered that.
Yep.
And I guess what did mention Andrew there, but
Yeah. And of course, Andrew is significant because Andrew, I believe, is the brother of Peter, if I'm not mistaken. So, they were kind of found at the same time. James and John were found at the same time. Andrew is probably like number 4. It goes Peter, James, John, Andrew. If you were like ranking the most prominent apostles, it would probably be those 4. Good. Anything else? Any other thoughts, questions, comments so far?
You know, it's like, things back then wasn't like they are today. On TV, you see all this stuff. You imagine what those people thought. Somebody was running for prison for dead.
Yeah. Yeah, it didn't happen very frequently, right? Excuse me, like never, actually. And if you think about, even in the Old Testament, how many examples in the Old Testament do we have of anybody being risen from the dead? Not very many. Only a couple, only a handful, right? But in the time and ministry of Jesus, this is going to be for us the second time we have seen Jesus raise somebody from the dead. But just because it's the second time for us doesn't mean necessarily that any of these people had ever seen it before. They probably heard about what happened in Nain. They probably heard rumors about this dead boy who came back to life. They may have heard these rumors. They were in Galilee. Remember, Galilee is only the size of Harrison County, so it's not a very big place geographically. And so I'm sure they heard about what Jesus had done in Nain, but here they're about to see it for themselves. And I can't imagine what they thought. I can't imagine what it was like for them. It's probably just as bizarre as we would think if we saw something like that today. Probably even more so.
Well, you know, nowadays you hear of people being brought back, you know, and they died on the table 4 or 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
And it means nothing to us.
Mm.
You know, just after common sense.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's very interesting to think about, yeah. Very interesting, very true. Okay, so he goes on and he brings them in. Let's see. It says he came to the house and, who was there? Who was at the house? Verse 38, when he gets there.
The wailers and the weepers.
Yeah, the weepers and the wailers were there. So this, like Brother Robert pointed out, this gives us a sign that the girl had probably been dead for a while, at least a few hours, which also kind of goes with what Sister Lois was saying. I would imagine when Jesus was ministering to this lady that this was not like a one and done real fast thing. You got to remember, in Scripture, we are really given summaries of things, summaries of Jesus' teaching, summaries of the miracle stories, summaries of the things that the apostles were writing. This is not like an exhaustive courtroom transcript of everything that happened when Jesus spoke to people. We don't have that. We have kind of summarized stories. And so it's not outrageous for us to think that, yes, his interaction with this woman lasted a long time. We know that because by the time they got there, it's not like the girl just died. She had been dead long enough that they had already paid the mourners. The mourners were already there. The weepers were already. They were already starting the grieving process, which was a long and important process in their culture. Any thoughts or questions or comments about that?
whenever you think of him feeding the 4,000, feeding the 5,000, they were there long enough to get hungry.
Right.
And long enough for them to be concerned that if we don't feed these people, what's going to happen? So yeah, we are just getting a synopsis of these things going on.
Did they pay these people just to have a higher statue? You know, more whalers you had, the more prominent you are?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. In fact, in one of the things I heard while I was researching for this is that there's reports of like emperors at this time that when they died, there's reports of people talking about how the dead emperor could hear the weeping and the moaning of the people as they grieved from the grave. So it was so loud, it lasted for so long, there was such a show about it that, the dead emperor could hear the people grieving from the grave. It was a joke, obviously, that he was saying, but it's this idea, when an emperor dies, the entire kingdom is grieving. The entire kingdom is ripping their clothes. The entire kingdom is fasting. When one little girl like this dies, the minimum is 2 flutes and one professional mourner. But obviously, the more status you have, the more wealth you have, you hire more mourners. And the more mourners you have, people think you're more important because look at all these people who came to honor this dead person. So that was that played into it for sure. For sure. I would imagine. I don't know, but I would imagine. It makes sense to me that it would. Good question. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? All right, well, we've seen here who's there. We know who these people are. And we know what they're doing. Now let's read Jesus' response. Let's look at verse 39 and 40.
When he came in, he said to them, "Why make this commotion and weep? This child is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him. But when he had put them all outside, he told his father and mother of the child and those who were with him, and entered with the child who was lame.
Okay, so what does Jesus say to the weepers and the wailers?
Stop.
Yeah, he tells them to get out. And what does he say before all that, though?
Why are you doing all this?
Yeah.
The child's not dead, sleeping.
She's not dead.
But you were there, and you saw this child dead, obviously dead, in the bed.
And remember, these guys were professionals. They knew what a dead body looked like, right? This was their job. This is what they did. Go ahead.
And you would wonder, well, gosh, he really doesn't know very much if he's the teacher. He doesn't. He can't do what they say he's done.
And so what did they do? Like, in light of that thought, how did the mourners respond then to Jesus? They ridiculed him. They mocked him. It says in the old King James, they laughed him to scorn, right? Which is interesting. These guys are professional mourners. They're weeping, they're wailing, they're carrying on. And then all of a sudden they switch on a dime and they're laughing and joking and making fun of Jesus and all of his ignorance, right? So that tells you about kind of the sincerity of their mourning, I guess we could say. But besides this, what we see, again, is this idea. Listen, I know you're a carpenter. You build a fine teepee or whatever. I know you're a teacher. You're real good with the scrolls. You do a wonderful job. Why don't you just leave the assessing of the dead bodies to us, Jesus? I know you're saying that she's asleep. I've seen a lot of dead bodies. This girl is dead. And they laugh him to scorn. He says that she is asleep. Now, I do want to think about this for a second. We actually talked about this on Sunday night in our little class that we were doing. And that's because this was on my mind because I had already been thinking about it. But look at what he says. He says, "Weep not, she is only asleep." Now, there are in the New Testament 9 uses of the word sleep in reference to death. So in the New Testament, death is referred to as sleep 9 times in 5 passages. So we have this story in which Jesus says the dead girl is only sleeping. We have the story of Lazarus where Jesus says that Lazarus is not dead, he is only asleep. We have a story in Matthew 27 when Jesus died. It says that the graves were opened and the saints of old who were asleep came out of the tombs and were walking among the people. That's the next instance it uses it. It uses it again. The Apostle Paul uses the metaphor for sleep in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, when he talks about how Christ is the first fruits of them that were asleep. Christ in his resurrection, he became the first fruits of them who rose from the dead, those who were asleep, you see. And then the last one is in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Paul again is talking about those who are asleep in Christ, and he says, concerning them which are asleep. So in all of those 5 passages, this metaphor is used for death. He says they are asleep. And this is a thing that we see not only in the New Testament, but also in the Old. So why? That's the question. Why do we think Jesus, Paul, other biblical writers, why do they use this metaphor of sleep when they refer to death? What do we think?
It's not permanent.
Very good. I think that's exactly right. What is Jesus doing when he says she's not dead, she's asleep? He's expressing the state that this girl finds herself in is a temporary state. It's not a permanent state. She will not remain like this forever. She is not permanently gone. She is asleep. This is a temporary state that they find themselves in. Paul, when he's talking about them who are asleep in Christ, he's saying this is a temporary state. It is emphasizing that aspect of death, that death is not final, death is temporary. Because as Christians, we believe in the final resurrection, where both the righteous and the unrighteous in the end will be raised to life. And both the righteous and the wicked will live for eternity. There will be eternal life, whether it's in heaven or whether it's in hell. Either way, there will be a resurrection. Our death is a temporary state before that final resurrection and the final judgment. So we do see Jesus emphasizing here the temporary nature of death while he's dealing with this. Now, I do want to say, and we'll open this up to questions and comments, I do want to say we do not want to read too much into this metaphor, though. You start to get problems when you start to read too much into a metaphor or pull too much out of a metaphor. We don't want to read too much into the metaphor of sleep for death, other than, I think, really to point out what is the obvious face of the issue, which is it's pointing to that temporary state. I think that's about the only conclusion we can really draw from that definitively, is that this is emphasizing the fact that death is temporary. So, any thoughts, questions, comments? Go ahead.
I think the one thing, what naturally follows being asleep, being awake.
Right.
And so that kind of lends to hope. Now, those that are asleep will eventually become awake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's as far as I can read it. That's the kind of hope.
Yeah, absolutely. It does give rise to hope. It should give rise to hope. That's probably the point. You know, everyone's afraid of death, but if we think of death as a temporary state, that might alleviate some of that fear a little bit. Any other thoughts, ideas, comments about this? All right, well, they laugh him to scorn. He goes in. Let's go ahead now and pick up verse 41 through 43. Let's finish it out.
Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, Tabitha, come, which is translated, little girl, I say to you, arise. Immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 7. Walked, for she was 12 years of age, and they were overcome with great amazement. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know it, and said that something should be given her to eat.
Okay, and that kind of brings us to an end of this story here. Now, a couple things to point out here. It says that he took the damsel by the hand, so he went into where she was laying. He put everybody out. He's in there with the mother and the father and Peter, James, and John. So those are who's in the room. It says that he took the damsel by the hand and he said to her this strange phrase and a strange language that we don't know. Talitha kumi. What is that? Well, who can tell me what language was the New Testament written in? We've talked about this before.
Written in Greek.
Okay, the New Testament. Okay, very good. Yes, the New Testament was written in Greek. Yet, most people tend to agree, and I'm one of them, that Jesus, his everyday language that he spoke while he lived on earth, was probably not Greek, but Aramaic. Which Aramaic is like a Semitic language. It's not exactly Hebrew, but it's very closely related to Hebrew. And it's most of the people in the time and place that Jesus lived That was their primary language, especially if you're a Jew, obviously, was Aramaic. Greek was like English is today. Like if you go to Africa, you're going to find people who speak French mostly, a little bit of English, enough to do business in. Maybe they speak a little bit of another language, and then they have like a native language that they speak. The same was true in Jesus' time as well. So Greek was like the popular business language. He probably did speak enough of that to interact with the Greek world, but his kind of mother tongue, his heart language, if you will, would have been Aramaic. And this phrase, Talitha Kumi, is an Aramaic phrase. And so while many of the things that we have in Scripture are presumably translations of what Jesus was saying, this is an instance where Mark actually writes down in the language which it was originally spoken, the thing that Jesus said. And so he writes here in Aramaic this phrase. And what does the phrase mean?
Little girl, get up.
Little girl, get up. And some of your translations may even translate this as my little lamb or something like that. This was like a term of endearment. It had to do with a little lamb, a little girl, someone who is precious to you. And so, yeah, Jesus in his native tongue, in her native tongue, speaking very kind of soft, gentle words to her. Little girl, come on, get up, basically. He's calling her from death to life in a language that she would understand in her own tongue. And she responds to it, right? And how do we know she responds to it? What do we see she does?
She gets up and walks around.
Yeah, straight away, immediately. She rises, she walks. It says here that she was 12 years old. I think we should recognize that this girl is 12 years old. The woman with the issue of blood suffered for 12 years. So the entire time that this little girl has been alive, that other girl that we were talking to earlier has been suffering her entire life. She's never known anything other than that. And here's this little girl who, presumably hasn't suffered in that way, but now she is but a little girl and she finds herself dead, right? And that 12-year thing, I think we should pay attention to that. We should notice that. Even if we don't read too much into it, there's something going on there. And it says that everybody, after they saw this, they were astonished. And in the King James here it says, they were astonished with great astonishment. So that's, doubling up here. They were blown away. They could not even comprehend what was happening in front of them. It's like our brother pointed out earlier. Imagine if you were a witness to something like this. Imagine seeing someone who was definitely dead being risen to life. How astonished with great astonishment would you be? Right?
Well, now they're in a private room with the little girl, and it's just Jesus plus the 5 other people. Okay, and they were the one overcome with great amazement. I can see where the parents would be overcome with great amazement, but the disciples also were overcome with great amazement. So I would have thought that they would say, I knew it. We know what he can do, and he's just showing us again.
He did it again. Yeah.
He's doing it again. But the fact that they were so amazed that they were overcome with great amazement is kind of curious to me.
Yeah.
Not everybody's afraid to die.
Yes, that's
You got
true.
the thrill seekers.
Yeah, that's true.
Because if they were afraid to die, they'd never do what they do. Like climb Yosemite without a rope.
Yeah, some people are more or less audacious, I suppose, when it comes to how much care they put into protecting their life. That is true.
Why do you think he would tell them to give her something to eat? I just can't.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing, to give her something to eat. If I had to guess, I'd probably say it's because she'd been dead for a long time and was probably hungry. I mean, I don't want to read too much into it there, but I think that's fair enough to say. And you think they're freaking out. Everyone's astonished with great astonishment, and she's walking around, and Jesus is probably like, hey guys, she's probably hungry. We should probably give her something to eat. That's true, yeah. To demonstrate this is a real physical resurrection. That's a really good point. Yeah, give her something to eat so you can see this isn't a ghost. This isn't a mirage. This isn't a hallucination. No, she's really alive. Feed her something. That's a good point.
I gotta ask you a question about the fish.
Okay.
Was it raw fish? Smoked fish?
It was probably
It
salted.
was smoke.
I can't eat.
Could have been smoked. It was probably salted, I would imagine. You're talking about like the, that's a very common preservation technique, especially salting the fish. That's what most people would have done. April, do you have a question?
Yeah, when it says that he commanded them strictly that no one should know it, how do you not know somebody's not dead? Or, they were dead first and then they're...
Told them not to say anything about it, not to tell. And that's something that, is it in Mark that the overarching theme of Mark is Jesus is a reluctant celebrity?
Well, one of the things, we've already seen this in Mark, haven't we? We've already
No,
seen.
every time he does a miracle, don't tell anybody.
Yeah, we've seen
Yeah,
where
it's-
Jesus does things and he tells people not to say anything, to keep it on the hush. And we've talked about why that is. Does anybody
That's only in
remember?
Mark, though. The others.
It happens in others too. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there's a whole theme. There's a phrase that talks about this idea. Does anybody remember the phrase that we use to describe
The one I
this?
heard was the reluctant celebrity.
Okay, that's not the one that I'm
And
thinking
that's,
of.
but that was in the study I did. That was the theme of it.
What I'm thinking of is this idea of the, now I can't, the messianic secret. You guys remember when we've talked about that? How Jesus did not want people to know he was the Messiah yet. Remember, he commanded the demons to keep their mouths shut about who he was. He's told people after miracles not to spread the news, not to tell anybody. We see here an instance where he's telling them again, do not tell anybody, do not spread this around. Next week, when we look at the miracle story we're looking at, Lord willing, we will see again, he tells those people, do not tell anybody about this. Yet in all of the circumstances, what do they do anyway? They go out and they tell. The word spreads. And if you read this story in Matthew, it actually specifically says Jesus told them not to tell anybody, but they went out and told everybody anyway, and the fame of the story spread to everywhere beyond this. And there are many reasons Jesus might not want people to know. The biggest reason, I think, though, at the heart of it, is that Jesus had the will of the Father to accomplish. He had to go to the cross. It had to be at the right time. His time had not come yet. He did not come to just do a bunch of party tricks and have everybody think he was cool. That was not the purpose of his ministry. He had a job to finish, and he didn't need a bunch of people thronging him everywhere he goes, trying to make him king, trying to do all this stuff, preventing him from following through with the mission that he was sent to accomplish. That's why where it says in John, after he fed all those people, they wanted to make him king. And what did he do? He withdrew from them. And it says specifically, they wanted to make him king, so he departed. He got away from them. It wasn't his time yet. There was what we call the messianic secret. Jesus did not want word to get out about who he was, even though there were people who obviously understood his message, believed his message. He was doing all kinds of miracles, but he still, at this early point in his ministry, is telling people, don't say anything. Don't tell people who I am. It's not my time yet.
When you turn water into wine, how do you keep that a secret?
Well, I'm sure people heard about it,
Probably all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, by the time we get to this point, he's got thousands, tens of thousands of people following him everywhere he goes. So, word spread, word got out apparently. He didn't do a very good job at keeping that secret, but he did try. He did
I
try.
was thinking maybe it was reverse psychology, like, don't tell nobody, but...
To make him go tell everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. In fact, the only person who, so far, Jesus has actually said, go and tell everybody what God has done for you. Who is the only person Jesus said that to so far? Not the leper.
The guy in the grave,
Yeah, the demoniac.
yes.
The guy he delivered from 2,000 demons. Because that man wanted to go with Jesus. And what did Jesus tell him?
Don't tell everybody.
He said, no.
Well, no.
Yeah, go home and tell everybody all the things that God has done for you. So the only person who Jesus has given permission to tell was this Gentile demoniac whom he had just delivered. That's the only person that has permission.
Gentile, he told him Gentile.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, so there's something there. But why might that be? Because amongst the Gentiles, they did not have that same messianic expectation, that messianic fervor. The Gentiles were not looking for the Messiah. The Jews were. The Jews were ready to crown a king right now. The Gentiles weren't thinking that way.
But didn't he tell them to go talk to the priest?
There were other people whom he has told to do that, like a leper that was healed.
Yeah, I'm supposed to talk to the priest.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to confuse the stories because there's so many stories and there's so many similar stories that they all can kind of blend in our mind a little bit. But yes, sometimes that has happened. But here's a case where he says, don't tell anybody, and of course they tell anybody anyway. If y'all don't mind, I'd like to stay just a couple minutes late so we can go over a few of these interpretations. We've kind of walked through the story. We've seen it. I want to offer now for you just a few interpretations, a few ways we can look at this story, understand this story, maybe even apply it to our lives. Of course, there is the literal interpretation, which we talked about earlier. Excuse me. In this story, Jesus demonstrates his power over death. It's kind of like the crowning jewel. That's why this is the last story in this series of miracles. Matthew, Mark and Luke definitely. This is the last miracle story in this little group of miracles. And he's really crowning it by saying, yes, Jesus has power over death. Not only sickness, not only the supernatural world, not only the natural world, yes, even death itself. And so that's kind of the literal interpretation. But as we've been looking at all these, we've been looking at multiple different ways. So what's the spiritual interpretation? What's kind of a metaphorical interpretation? Here's one idea. Jesus can take dead situations and raise them up to life. You might have something in your life that you think is dead, that is gone. The weepers and the wailers are already singing their dirge. And what we are reminded in this story is that even if the situation kind of looks dead on the surface, Christ can step in and change everything. He can raise your dead situation to life, even if it looks hopeless. Christ can fix those kinds of things. He can raise dead situations to life. That's a spiritual interpretation and application. There's a few moral interpretations we have. The first one, death is temporary. I think this is an important thing we see in this lesson. That it's like he says, she's not dead, she's only asleep. Death is temporary. Our sister said not everybody is afraid of death. And the truth is, as Christians, we need not fear death. We die, we know people who die, we grieve, but we don't grieve, we don't live, we don't fear death as those who have no hope. We understand that death is a temporary state. We have hope for life to come, even after death. So that's an important thing for us to take away from this story. Here's another thing I thought was interesting. Here's a moral takeaway from this story. Sometimes you have to take faithless people and just put them out of your life. There are situations where you just have to kick all the faithless people out of the room and say, listen, whatever, but if you're going to laugh and scorn and mock and just be all that, you got to go. You got to get out of my face. That's what Jesus did in this situation. He took all these weepers and wailers and doubters and mockers and scoffers, and he just kicked them out of the room. He said, we don't need all that in here. You all go. I'll keep my disciples and the parents and the people who believe for a miracle, and we'll go in here and see a miracle. Sometimes you got to just kick people out of your space because they don't fit. They don't belong. They're not helping you. They're not doing anything good. They need to be moved around, as it were. And sometimes this story reminds us that it's necessary for us to kick people out of our circle, to be a little more choosy about who is in our circle, who we are allowing to accompany us on our journey of faith. Sometimes you got to kick people out of that circle. And we don't like hearing that, but it's just true. Here's another one. This is a good one too. Christ might not always be on our time, but he is always on time. See that? I think Jarius learned this firsthand, right? Christ probably didn't come at the time he wanted him to come, but Christ came when he arrived, and when he arrived, he did what he needed to do. He might not always be on our time, but he's definitely always on time. We see this also in the story of Lazarus, do we not? How he knew Lazarus was sick, but he's intentionally waited for several days. And then when he gets there, what does Martha say? If you would have just been here, he wouldn't have died. He's not always on our time, but he's always on time. And then the last one, and I'll let you guys comment to close here. The last one is the eschatological or the end times interpretation. And I said this: in the end, all of the dead in Christ shall be raised and restored to fullness of life, never to die again. You see, this little girl, she was raised to life, but of course she would go on to die again. But there will be a day where all of the dead in Christ shall be raised to perfection, to life everlasting, never to die again. Yes, what we can take from this story is death is temporary. This girl was raised to life, but she did, of course, die again. However, in the end, when it's all said and done, we shall be risen and restored to life, and we will never die again. So, that being said, this series of miracles that we've been looking at over the last little while, from the stilling of the storm to the deliverance of the demoniac, to the healing of the woman with the issue of blood, to the raising of the dead daughter, all of these stories are demonstrating some aspect of Christ and His divine power, His God-like nature. He is demonstrating His power over the created realm in all of these miracles, and they're presented in order to communicate that story. But as we've been looking at them, we see there is more to the story than just that. There's a lot of things we can pull out of it, but I have emphasized that aspect of the story over and over and over because it really fits into kind of the overarching view as we're marching through the story, keeping in mind what the Gospels are intended to do. The Gospels are intended to teach us who Jesus is. And every single story in Scripture, in the Bible, they're not just put there randomly, like, oh, I remember this thing he did. Oh, I remember this thing he did. No. Every miracle, every teaching, every saying, every story, it's all intended to teach us something about who Christ is. And these miracles teach us that Christ is divine, that He is God in flesh, that He has power over this entire realm of creation in a way that no other mere human could possibly exercise. So, that's that. That's these little stories. Like I say, next week, Lord willing, we've got one more miracle story that's found in Matthew I want to look at before we move forward. But before we come to a close in our last couple minutes, does anybody have any final questions, comments, anything like that?
Is there anywhere in the Bible that says you need to be buried instead of cremated?
I mean, not necessarily. No, there's no commandment, thou shalt be buried.
Well, they had some of the other ones.
Yeah, there's a lot of people have that discussion, and different people come down on different sides of that coin, but I don't think that I don't think it's commanded that we must be buried, and I don't think it's prohibited being cremated. Either way. So one of those things is not banned and the other one is not commanded. So it's kind of neither one of those is the case.
Makes sense.
I'm trying to get permission.
What?
You gonna burn me or burn me?
Oh, here we go.
She thinks he does it.
That's a good question.
I
Any
figure out
other
what you can do.
questions, comments, thoughts, concerns about this miracle story or any of them?
I've already been accused of killing him, or trying to kill him.
Well, he's still here, so I don't think that's
Yeah.
All right, very good. Well, thank you for coming out this evening. Sorry that I dropped the ball on dinner. Thank you to Ms. Bobby for saving the day. Like I say, Lord willing, we're going to come back next week looking at Matthew chapter 9 and it's really a good capstone for these miracle stories. I'll just say this, because what we're going to see is the two different ways that people are responding to Jesus. That's just to give you a preview. We're going to see the way that the regular common people responded to Jesus and the way that the religious leaders are responding to Jesus and all of His miracles. We're going to look at that in Matthew chapter 9 next week. Other than that, I hope to see you this upcoming Lord's Day. I don't know of any announcements off the top of my head. So that being said,
Isn't Saturday for us?
Yes, ladies.
The ladies are
I
going
don't think
to,
anybody's in here.
okay, the ladies are going to be at the church here in the banquet hall, and we're going to be making lunches for the shut-ins and delivering those to the shut-ins.
10 o'clock?
Anybody? Yeah, 10 o'clock.
10
Anybody
o'clock.
wants to come and help and do that?
Not anybody. You have to be a lady.
Oh, true that.
Sorry, Matthew.
Sorry.
Charlie, will you close us in prayer this evening?